But do we know if it affects us? Like, we don't really know. I mean, there's a lot of people that, oh, EMF, man. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's all bullshit. But what is the reality? Do we really know? And isn't all this stuff fairly recent?
Yeah. And I didn't believe there was a problem, and I thought if there were a problem, I would know about it because, of course, I knew all about what was important in science. Well, I was wrong. I liked the fact that I could call people or actually send them messages and expect an answer at all hours of the day, and found it kind of fun in the beginning. And when somebody said to me there could be a problem with this with our health, I said, oh, don't be ridiculous. If there was a problem, I'd know about it. Well, I was wrong. And what I now know is that information is being sent to people routinely to give them safety information. I'm going to ask you to help me out here by looking at how many of you have an iPhone. Now, I assume you didn't all turn them off. So, for those of you who have an iPhone, would you nod, raise your hand again? I'd like you to share with your colleagues. So please go to the settings on your phone, all right? Please take a moment and nod when you've got there, all right? And be prepared to share, all right? Go to settings on the phone. Got there? All right. Now, get to settings. Now go to about. I'm sorry, you have to go to general first. There's a mistake here. You have to go to general. All right? Under general, under settings. Then go to about, which is at the top. You got there? About? Yes? Okay. Now you have to scroll all the way down to something you don't normally see, called legal. You got to legal? All right. Now click on RF exposure. Now you can read it later, but it's basically telling you that you need to know that you cannot keep the phone directly next to your body without exceeding the as-tested exposure guidelines. And by the way, the iPhone does it. I happen to know how to find it on the iPhone. I'm just learning the Android system myself. But all smartphones come with some information that basically says, don't keep the phone in your pocket or you will exceed the as-tested exposure guidelines. Now, how many of you knew that before today? Well, this is a very well-informed audience relative to others.
How were the current FCC exposure guidelines set? As you already heard, they happened back in the 1980s, and they were based on studies on 8 rats and 5 monkeys. And anybody familiar with epidemiology or clinical studies of any sort know that you want to get as many large an N as possible, as many subjects as possible. So here we're dealing with 13 animals. And there's a reference here that describes it in greater detail if you want to know that detail. So the assumption was that it's only heating effects that causes the problem. It's not the long-term chronic effects, which we now know is a problem. It's a problem that's not acknowledged by industry. And so because you're only looking at, or they only looked at acute problems in coming up with these guidelines, they only looked at studies that were an hour or less. Now, we're talking about the exposures that we're getting 24/7. To set those guidelines, they only looked at a 1 hour or less. So what was pointed out, and I'll just click through these in the interest of time, is that they took these animals that had been trained to push a lever to get food, and they put them in a room. They were food deprived. They put them in a cage and kept ramping up the electromagnetic fields that they were exposed to till the point where they could no longer perform that very simple task of pushing the lever to get food, even though they were starving. So they took that and declared that as being the upper limit for exposure. And then they divided that number by 50. In the case of workers, they only divided that by 10. But for the population in general, they took that upper limit, the point at which monkeys even got burns on their faces from the very high exposure, divided it by 50 and said, that's fine. That's okay for the public in general. This is why I wanted you to see it a second time, because it's just so important and it's so very wrong. So that's where those guidelines came up from. So if you hear anybody talking about FCC guidelines and well, we're within compliance, this is what they're talking about. It's woefully inadequate. And that safety factor, they call it, of 50, that's not based on any relative risk. It's an arbitrary number.
So they exceeded the limits. But in 2019, under that other administration, they issued a statement saying the phones passed the outdated safety limits, which is true, but keep in mind, the outdated safety limits allow a phone to be tested up to an inch off the body. So you had the US government deliberately deceive the American public by issuing a statement that phones passed the outdated safety limits in 2019. But what they did not tell you is that the FCC had actually confirmed what the Chicago Tribune and before that the Canadian Broadcasting Company had done. They confirmed that the tested phones exceeded their 1996 guidelines. We only found out about this because it was disclosed through a Freedom of Information Act request that we made in 2023. So this information remained hidden. And also not only hidden from us, but hidden from the US Circuit Court of Appeals, which was then reviewing all of the agency record because of a challenge that our organization had mounted. So lawsuits can be expensive, but when they're focused and targeted, they can be extremely effective. And I would argue that this was one that paid off and is continuing to pay off handsomely, because with Mr. Sandry's assistance, we are now holding their feet to the fire. And we're saying, okay, what have you done lately? This is what, I want to just make sure you see this. That is this current level, 1.6, the yellow arrow. And these are the test results that they kept hidden from the public that we're now disclosing to you here today. These are the results of commonly used phones. Samsung, Apple, all exceeding these outdated guidelines. And remember, the guidelines are set only to determine heat, not long-term effects that are important that I'm about to show you. So now we have to deal with a reality. There is an unexplained increase in colorectal cancer in the United States, England, Argentina, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, among others.